That is correct. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna admit all, right?
Spotlight Tony, please.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tony. What a beautiful way to welcome us all into um, this 9th week of the Gaia Journey and our final session of our Inhale day. We've had multiple sessions running since 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and it's now 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So we have been really in it, and thousands have joined us throughout the day. Maybe many of you have been overlapping as well. I see many in the chat here in this Zoom room sharing where you're from. So welcome, and I know that many more are joining in across the Zoom rooms. So we have multiple Zoom rooms happening now, and a welcome to those on YouTube as well, where we are also streaming. So however you've chosen to participate today, a warm welcome to you. And all of the different places. This session has a wonderful variation of us from different parts of the world. So welcome, welcome, welcome to all. And whether you've been here before or this may be your first time here with the Gaia Journey, we welcome you. And I will just give us a little landing space into where we are and where we've been. So a little bit about where we are, not there in the back screen. So I'll just give us a little landing into the moment of being in the Gaia Journey Inhale, which is where we are now. So at this inhale moment, we actually have had about 7,000 people join us for each inhale. And that's about representing over 70 countries. And we've had over 7 language tracks. So throughout the day, we had English in 3 sessions, Portuguese and Spanish. And then throughout each inhale week, we actually have other language tracks which have formed and have been sharing and dialoguing in various cultural contexts and really just spanning across that language. So French continues, Japanese has been going, the Dutch track, the German track, and so many teams working diligently to continue to create those experiences. So thank you to all who have been participating for holding space and creating that kind of community for each of us in this experience. So a little bit more about the journey for those of you who haven't been part of this so far. We really moved through an inhale and exhale experience as a way to kind of land with what's going on in the world. A lot of what we may be experiencing is a moment of crisis, and we've talked about that in a few of our sessions so far. And that has been shifting in different parts of the world. So there have been phases that it's kind of been moving into, and we know that now South America is becoming a hotspot for COVID, which also means that there's a moment where our communities feel a shift in our experience. Some of us have been in lockdown or in quarantine. And many of us have chosen to wear masks or stay at a safe distance in order to curtail the spread of the virus. And this inhale and exhale has allowed us to actually move through that. So whether it's on an individual level, taking a deep breath and sitting with just the breath moving in the body, or as a collective, taking a global inhale and exhale, something that we've been doing together. As we do that, we've also been meeting together weekly, and many of us have been doing that also in our social solidarity circles. So in exhale weeks, we've been joining together, and as much as we've had to be physically distant from each other, we've been joining together in community to find a way to move through this together and see and sense our system by moving into our own circles. So we've been doing that and also meeting new people using the social solidarity circles and hubs to start to build those connections. We have been doing this since March 27th. We moved through this process and now we are at May 22nd. By July 10th, we will come together in a global forum where we'll get to hear and share a lot of the learnings and see where we are and look at some of the methodologies that each of us have used to be able to move through at least this portion of the time together. We have broken this up in order to kind of understand the journey and to map it along Theory U, which is a body of work that the Presencing Institute has been working on for decades, and Otto has been working on sharing with all of us. So the first part of this has really been around staying with. So really staying with what the experience is in the moment. And we've been doing that by using deep listening and dialogue. So that experience of understanding, how are you? What's happening for us? And understanding that. And rather than running from it or kind of jumping out of it, we're staying with that experience. And then after we kind of see and sense what's going on, we've been dropping into this deep resonance place. So really just sitting with, what am I still sitting with? What's really here for me, and dropping into a deeper connection to source. And that can mean a lot of things for a lot of different people. But that is what we've been in for the last few weeks, really just sensing into what's going on and how can we step into to our highest selves as individuals and as a collective. And now we begin to move into this moving with the vertical social prototyping. So we begin to move into taking action. We begin to move into crystallizing what's available to us. And in order to do that, we really have to shift our paradigm, shift our way of thinking, shift our way of being in the world. And Otto and Julia will share some more of that today. But the way that we'll do that today, also share just a little bit for those of us who have not been part of the GAIA journey so far. I'll share a little bit about this experience of our guests who have been coming in. So this for this session, we have Julia, who's joining us, who Otto will tell you more about in just a little while. But just to give us a little sense of some of the highlights, you can go to GaiaJourney.org and see the essentials. So you can watch some of the clips from the other speakers that we've had today. And you can also watch the speakers and learnings and practices and get some of the methods and tools from the rest of the 9 weeks of the journey. So in the first session, we heard from one of the participants and also shared that everything I've gone through in my life has prepared me for this moment. And we know that, as we saw in that inhale and exhale, that it may feel that one world is sort of dying or ending, and different pieces of that are no longer working, but that we're also stepping into a new space of possibility. Vandana Shiva came in and shared that the new colonization is the colonization of the mind. Dana Cunningham came in and shared with us that structural violence is a set of human agreements. And many of us remember Noel Nanup, who is from Western Australia and is an elder of the Aboriginal Noongar community. And he said, all we need to do is have the piece of the path to the future that is ours, and really tend that piece of the path that we are on. And we explored into how might we do that individually or as a collective. We utilize social presencing theater as a community and in our social solidarity circles 1.0 and 2.0, and we'll be sending you a guideline for 3.0 over the weekend. And we just started to explore what's the micro shifts that are beginning to happen within each of us and within our collective. And 2 weeks ago with Thomas Hubel, we started to look at collective trauma. So what happens in our community and in ourselves when we experience trauma, when we have a part of us that becomes kind of fragmented? That's what he called our past. And he said, we can sit with that and accept it, but then we need to, by doing that, maybe begin to integrate. In the Spanish and Portuguese tracks, we heard that what you like and what you don't, they both hold a marvelous secret to one's freedom. That was from Alejandro Corks in the Spanish track. And we need to be the system from Ubirachi Pataxo. and also from John Kabat-Zinn 2 weeks ago, who reminded us to wake up fully. So when we're just beginning to, feel a sense of aliveness or consciousness, to really just deepen that or expand our awareness, and for that to move us into awareness-based action. Peter Senge today said something this morning he said, "It's not about me. It's not about my little raft floating down the river. It's about the river." And I think that one thing he called us to in a few different places was moving from our individual experience to really holding the collective. And then Fritjof Capra joined us after Peter and really landed us into this current moment. What has been shifting with COVID? What's possible as we move forward? And what action will we take as a response to Gaia? And, with COVID as a response to Gaia, I'll let you look at that essential clip in GaiaJourney.org. And without further ado, I'll send it over to Otto, who will continue the framing and share where we are now in this moment.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. Hello, everyone. It's great to reconnect. And I just want to, before we move into the first round of check-in, kind of on your experience of the past 2 weeks, I want to double click on the methodological part of what the journey we are on. So basically what we are trying to do is to lean into the current moment with our mind and heart wide open. And for the past few weeks, we have been really focusing on this left-hand side here, seeing, sensing, deep listening, staying with. And today we'll be moving more into this part, right? Beginning to crystallize vision and intention. And when we step back and look at the bigger situation, we basically see two responses to the COVID-19 situation. One is described on the lower half here by accessing curiosity, compassion, courage. And it's basically a response of an outpouring, compassion, inspired action. And that's what Nipun Mehta and also John Kabat-Zinn were talking about last time. That's the one, and maybe the most important phenomenon that we see. At the same time, Thomas also, in the last Inhale session, reminded us that there is this other part of the reaction, which, sometimes in the recent session I was on earlier this week, somebody referred to as hyperbrutalization. And it's basically structural violence. And kind of when you look at the inner making, it's not accessing curiosity, compassion, courage, but it's a freeze reaction of the human mind, aka ignorance, hate, and fear, by closing the mind, heart, will. And what that results into, as Thomas was explaining to us, kind of what trauma and collective trauma really is when something is overwhelming, we disintegrate, we separate from a part of ourselves, which means being in denial, kind of not seeing and not feeling, desensing. Now, which then is heightened by absencing, disconnecting with our highest future possibilities, and then resulting in these behaviors, blaming others, violence. Remember Dana talking about the structural violence that we see amplified, and eventually self-destruction. So what we are saying here is when you face a situation like COVID-19, whether you respond to that from an inner place that is described on the lower half, or from an inner place that is described in the upper half, does have real-world consequences. In the case of the United States, the number here on self-destruction is reaching 100,000 early next week. Only 2 weeks earlier, the social distancing measures, applied would have saved 50,000 lives. So that's, how it matters. Those are the real world consequences. From the viewpoint of awareness-based systems change, we can say that experience is not what happens to us, but experience is what we do with what happens to us. And so whether we lean into it from one place or the other. And in the same way, we can say that future is not what happens to us, but what we do with what happens to us. So the real question is, how do we strengthen these deeper capacities here, not only on the level of the individual, but also on the level of the collective? And what we believe is that to do so, we need innovations in infrastructures on 3 different levels: learning, democracy, and economy. So new learning infrastructures really means, or innovations in learning infrastructures really means whole person, whole system. So integrating head, heart, and hand in the context of real world change. New or innovation in democratic infrastructures really means making democracy more participatory by making it more direct, distributed, dialogic. And innovations in economic infrastructures really means creating infrastructures that help us to fundamentally shift the paradigm and way of operating from gravitating around ecosystem awareness to one that is revolving around ecosystem awareness, by which we mean an awareness that is focusing on the well-being of all. So when you look at the upper and the lower half, it's really kind of a shift from being stuck in your own ego towards connecting with the larger ecosystem awareness around us. And with that larger framing, I turn it back to Antoinette to lead us into the check-in.
Thank you, Otto. What we'll do is we really want to hear where you are with this experience. What's resonating for you? What are you sitting with? So what we'll do is move into breakouts of about 3 or 4 people, try to keep them small and intimate. And you'll be able to share your name, what's coming up for you, or your context. That might just be where you are and what's happening now. And then in the last inhale, we talked about an organ of perception that is opening for you. So Otto had shared the quote, every object well contemplated opens up a new organ of perception within us. So if that has felt like it rings true for something, if it rings true for you in some way, then what new organ of perception has been opening for you over the last few weeks? And the other question is, what is your intention now? Perhaps it's shifted from the initial time that you thought you were signing up for this experience or clicked in. It may, be continuously shifting, and that's okay. But the 4 things: your name, where you currently are, your context, what new organ of perception is opening up for you, and what is your intention now? So we'll move into breakouts for about 10 minutes and invite you to enjoy your time together. Okay, it looks like we are beginning to come back. So if you're in with us on YouTube, our Zoom rooms are now closing and we are coming back in to our main session with our full audience. And we'll be back in just about 30 seconds. And there we go. At least in channel 1, we are here. Okay, welcome back, everybody. What we're going to do, we really would love to move soon to hear from Julia, who has joined us as our special guest. So before we do that, we'd really just love to hear what's coming up for each of you by having you put it into the chat. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat button if you haven't already, and you can put in just any of the, maybe the new organ of perception that's opening for you, or the intention, or even an essence statement that may have come up from your small group conversation. So if you put it into your chat or in the comments on YouTube, we will be able to see them, and I'll share a few of them right before we introduce Julia. So I'll give it a few moments for that. So coming in from channel 1, it's about the river, not the raft. The river is the greater universe flowing along, and I can flow in my own kayak in the bigger universal river and try not to get dumped. My heart, animated by stories. The organ of perception, feet. Introspection, embracing the opportunity for living in a new paradigm, hopefully a better one. Inner opening, new feet to walk on, global connection, intention, strength. More seeing the world through the perceptions of the more than human world. From some of the other channels from YouTube, I am sensing fear also. And it is more of the fear of the unknown than / a new normal. Tuning into the vulnerability of the heart and of grief and opening to love. Discovering a global family. Embracing the messiness of healing and collective action, holding spaces for the process. What resonates with me right now, I sense so much fear all around me. People I know focusing mostly on what's wrong, on what should have been done differently. I will first thank you all for participating and for sharing, just a few, and know that there are so many wonderful comments coming in and sharing. And I will pass it over to Otto to introduce Julia.
Thank you, Antoinette. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Julia Kim. Julia is program director at the GNH Center in Bhutan. And she has been, a leading figure in the movement from GDP to GNH, and is, doing that while living in one of the most interesting living examples of that whole development, which is, which is Bhutan, which is, embodying kind of a different way of how we can organize the economy, and is helping us really to think in a more fluid way about what we might do here in our countries that by and large are all organized around GDP. and not about metrics that revolve around the well-being of humans and well-being of other species. So join me in welcoming Julia. Julia, it's so great to have you on here. And I remember when we first met, you were part of a quite traditional organization. I think that was back then the UNDP. So, and I have like two questions on my mind. One is whether you can give us a little bit like a gross national happiness 101. So a little bit kind of sharing with us, that why people are interested in that and the well-being metrics rather than GDP. We can do that maybe a little later, because at first maybe, and that's the other question, is really, what was that journey? So when we first met, kind of you were at the UNDP, and so what was your situation? What prompted you to leave this organization that does so many valuable and important work, or is trying to do that? And so what was your journey from there to where you are now? And not only from outside, kind of there's geography and institutional change, but also like your inner journey, kind of that moved you from one place to another. So I would like to invite you a little bit, taking us back to the UNDP days, and the what prompted you to move onto the journey that you're on now.
Thanks, Otto. So good to see you again. And yeah, I remember those days very clearly. I was, I was trained as a medical doctor, so a lot of my experience initially was in Canada and the United States, and then from there I went to South Africa and was kind of dropped into the middle of the HIV epidemic at a very difficult time. And the opportunity to work at the UN in New York was really attractive. I was initially UNDP and then UNICEF. And for someone who had been kind of working as a rural doctor and then working in research and policy, I thought, okay, this is it. This is where you have a global portfolio, very generous resources, very talented team, fingertips in all different places. This must be where we fix the world. And there were many moments where I was exhilarated and I was learning and I was feeling, my skills are being put to good use. And at the same time, there were a lot of questions that were coming up for me that had to do with, I'd say with my time in South Africa, a big part of it, which was I was working for UNDP, United Nations Development Program, and I was starting to have serious questions about that third word, development. What does it mean? And why do we call some countries developed and others developing, as if they were like your kid brother or, I don't know, something that needs to grow up to become worthy of sitting at the head table? And especially when I started comparing my experience of going from so-called developing countries back to New York, and I would see that the level of kind of well-being or connection or feeling part of a larger whole was often much more vibrant to me in small rural communities, places that didn't have a lot of resources but were at least pulling together, than in some very modern busy cities like New York, where a lot of my friends, and I would say myself included, were getting caught up in a very busy lifestyle, making lots of money, spending it just as quickly, feeling more insecure financially in that environment than I'd had when I was in South Africa, when I didn't even carry a wallet because there was nothing to buy, and questioning what is development and why are we all moving in this one direction that doesn't seem to be necessarily bringing greater happiness and well-being. And it was when I was there that I had the chance to meet the Prime Minister of Bhutan at a high-level meeting towards a new economic paradigm, happiness at the center of it, that really piqued my attention. But I have to say that it was not an easy decision to leave the UN. There were a lot of uncertainties. I didn't even know if I was going to end up in Bhutan. I hadn't heard of the country until that meeting. And there was a lot of things about my identity and my way of life that I would have to let go of if I were to move from New York and from the UN. And it was at that time, Otto, that I think not just by coincidence that you and I first met. I was inviting you and Peter Senge and others to try and interface with the work I was doing at the UN, with the idea that we had to shift the inner condition of people as well as the kind of projects we were doing. And I think because of our relationship and our connection, it gave me a little bit of the courage I needed to make the leap at that point. But definitely it was not one of these well-planned career trajectories. It kind of all happened in a very spontaneous and somewhat messy way.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably what we all recognize, right? That's probably the only way this kind of stuff is happening. Now, when you met the Prime Minister of Bhutan, what exactly was it that attracted? So the messy part is the inner, right? Kind of the fear and all of that, what comes with that. But there was something that was pulling you, right? When you met the Prime Minister, what was it?
I think it was the sense that the Prime Minister, the country, the leadership, it's a constitutional monarchy, so the kings have a strong presence there, had articulated a really bold vision for what they wanted to see the country moving towards, and that was happiness and well-being. And I remember the invitation to that UN meeting came on this beautiful piece of thick embossed paper with the seal of Bhutan on the top, and it said, "Considering that the well-being and happiness of all life should be the center of development, you are invited to this meeting." And I had never seen something that was so inclusive and saying it so clearly that not just humans, but all life on the planet is where we should be steering our development. And I loved the Prime Minister's definition of happiness, because at first I thought, happiness, that sounds so superficial. I mean, how can you run a country based on happiness? And then realized that they're not just talking about fleeting moods, feeling good. It's about what is our priority, what is the highest longing that we have, and it's really towards realizing our highest purpose. And in the Prime Minister's words, he said, true abiding happiness. So not superficial, moody happiness, but true abiding happiness cannot exist while others suffer, but comes from serving others, living in harmony with nature, and come to know the true and brilliant nature of our own minds. So a very profound definition of happiness. And one that I think really connects to what you and Peter were talking about earlier today, Peter Senge, when you were talking about systems thinking. And Peter was talking about the importance of intention. It's not just important, it's the only thing that matters. And framing systems thinking as being an integration of mind and matter, that the world we create, the development model we want, the societies we live in starts with our intentions. So by stating very clearly our intention is to bring happiness and well-being to all life as a model of development, then you can start to align your attention with your intention. And how do you do that? Through measurement. I mean, we all know the power of metrics and measurements. GDP is a conventional measurement that we use now for economics and for development. It's all over the headlines now with the COVID pandemic. It captures our attention. We like numbers. So what if we shifted what we're measuring? What if we said what we should be measuring is how is well-being being expressed in a country? How do we create the outer conditions for well-being and happiness? And Bhutan measures in a national survey 9 domains or areas which they believe are really important for creating an environment where people, animals, nature can flourish. And that includes not just the traditional building blocks of development like health and education and living standards. Of course, those are important, but other things like psychological well-being, time use, which is one that we've all noticed changing radically during this pandemic and lockdown, time wealth, time poverty. What is time use doing to us? Community vitality. How vibrant are our communities? Do we know our neighbors? Suddenly this has become important during the pandemic. Cultural diversity and resilience, environmental conservation, good governance. All of these are measured as a survey to be able to tell whether we're moving towards our intention. Are we steering towards greater well-being and happiness? And I think that's really important. And it really sets, I think, a very different model where happiness is not just an internal personal thing, nor is it just an external systems thing. It's the interaction of the two that come together. And I think so that's very much in the flavor of what we've been talking about in Gaia. How do we bring those two together as we try to envision and create the world that we want to see post-COVID-19?
So what I heard you describing is really the shift more towards an intentional economy, right? That allows us to realign intention and attention kind of around some of the dimensions that you mentioned, essentially around well-being, not only of human well-being, but of all living beings. Now, I wonder, though, if you could just remind us, isn't that also some of that, at least what the GDP tries to do? So what's wrong with GDP really, and is there anything wrong? And what is the difference, kind of when you look at? So there's a big discussion going on around beyond GDP, but why is that? So what's and if we apply this metrics that you suggest, for example, on the current situation, right? So everyone is talking about GDP going down and these things. So in terms of GNH, did it just go up, or so how does that apply to our current situation? But first, start with, so what's the problem with GDP, if any?
So GDP is, it's a formula, it's a number that's not bad in itself. In fact, when it was first brought to light, it was in the 1940s after the Great Depression and after the World Wars, as a way to kind of look at fluctuations in economic activity so that governments could respond to that. So it was never actually intended to be a reflection of quality of life or well-being. And even Simon Kuznets, who's the economist who came up with that formula, said it was never intended to be used in that way. But what happened is that it was taken up by the World Bank and the IMF and others as really an indication of how a country is doing, and correspondingly an indication of its status in the world. And GDP is kind of a problem in terms of measuring how well we're doing for two reasons. One is what it measures, and the other is for what it fails to measure. So in terms of what it measures, it only measures costed economic activity, and it measures that regardless of its impact on our actual lives. So for example, Bhutan has pledged to maintain the country under 60% forest cover for all time. It's in its constitution. And that's one of the reasons why it's the first carbon negative country in the world. They are absorbing more carbon from the atmosphere than they're putting out. So if Bhutan were to decide, wow, what a great resource, we need to be chopping down these trees and exporting wood to India, that would increase GDP, but would bring down GNH, would bring down the quality of life, the sustainability, not to mention the beauty of the forests in Bhutan. So one problem is what GDP measures, whether it's good or not. In the United States, for example, GDP goes up when there's more crime, when there's more privatized prisons that are being built, more ambulances, GDP will go up, even though nobody would argue that quality of life is going up as well. The second problem is what GDP fails to measure, which is a lot of the things that we kind of naturally know is important for our own well-being and happiness. And these are things that are not costed and are not marketed economic activity. So think of the things that a lot of us have been doing at home. Just 2 days ago, I was cutting my mom's hair because all the shops are closed, right? There was no financial transaction happening there, but there was a lot of love and connection and a damn good haircut that came out of that. That is not being measured in GDP. If you have aging parents, for example, and you want to keep have them living with you or living in the home independently as long as possible and not to put them in a care home, their quality of life may be very strong, but GDP will not go up. So a lot of the caring economy, a lot of the things that we do for free, public spaces, public beaches, where you're not being asked to pay money to go in, those don't contribute to GDP, but they are really important for our day-to-day life and for our happiness as human beings.
Well, thank you for this, for sharing that. And it is really a very, so when you look in the West, when you look at the global conversation, there's a huge conversation going on around beyond GDP and all the other metrics. And you know, GNH and Bhutan are one of the prime examples, really, that remind us that we can, the way we organize our economy now is just one way of doing it. We could do it in a much more intentional way. So I wonder, Julia, whether, so you talked a little bit about, you know, the UN days, a little bit about GNH, the Bhutanese experience. I wonder whether you could share with us a little bit about the journey, kind of from one to the other, because many of us are really, we all are actually, particularly on a collective level, in that in-between state, right? We know kind of one thing is maybe ending or should be ending or is about to, and we feel something else is maybe wanting to happen, but I don't know how, right? I don't know how to step into that. That's very much a theme that's coming up from our community. Now, you having lived in that space so what can you share with us? And can you maybe then also not only share something with us, but invite us into a practice that allows us to explore a little bit that edge of our own journey?
Thanks, Otto. You know, if I were to reflect on that time, I think about it, you know, in Buddhist terms, you would think about it as a bardo period. Bardo meaning a gap or a period of transition from one state to another. And we notice them as when they're very obvious. You know, you could speak of one bardo being the bardo of death, passing from life into death, or from wakefulness into sleep. But they're happening all the time. And most of the time, they're uncomfortable when they're happening. My experience of moving from the UN into the what's next was a feeling initially of dissonance. So a feeling of what used to satisfy me and what used to feel right suddenly is not doing that anymore. And for me, there's usually a period of denial of that and a trying to make it work and do more. And it was also not just manifesting in work. It was a realization that living in one of the great capitals of the world, in Manhattan, and having a great house, great friends, busy life, there seemed to be something missing for me. And it was also a feeling like I would look up in the sky and I couldn't see the moon. There were so many skyscrapers and buildings. It was a strange thing after being in rural Africa to realize I miss nature. I hadn't realized that before. It was a feeling like the constant striving was somehow out of balance with how I felt the change was happening in me, which was a kind of moving into stillness and a not doing so much. At that point in my life, I was starting to meditate more, and I was had just come out of a long meditation retreat. And so the feeling I had was that what I was moving into next was going to have to be different. It was a different me that was coming out, and I was going to have to let go of something in order for that to happen. There was also a feeling of, it's a little bit about what you said earlier today, that everything that has come up to this point has prepared me for this moment. So while there is a dissonance and a discomfort and almost you can't stand being in your skin, and there's a kind of impulse to want to push it away or look down on what's come before. At the same time, it was a kind of embracing. It served me to this point, but now there's something else I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe it's the way a snake feels when it's trying to shed its skin. Why does this not fit anymore? And why is it so itchy? And why can't I, you know, and it's a feeling a kind of a feeling of death, because what's happening? The skin is coming off, you know, it looked so nice before. So there was that feeling of moving into what was going to come and not knowing what it was going to be yet. And it included things like, you know, having to let go of a certain amount of financial security, having to let go some relationships, having to shift the way I thought my life was going to be. I thought, you know, my CV looks really great up to this point. It's very easy to explain this university and then this, and then it drops off into this unknown thing after that. And all of the things are, you know, it sounds funny, but, you know, as people who grow up in the West, the CV and the identity and the academic achievements and the being able to explain your career trajectory are very important things. You go to a cocktail party and the first thing people ask you is, what do you do? And these days it's really hard for me to explain. And it takes at least 2 cocktails to explain what gross national happiness is, let alone what I'm doing in Bhutan. So that's the cocktail party conversation has gotten a little bit longer. But the period of not knowing lasted for a while, and then it started to happen. And I noticed that as I let go of trying to be on top of things, of knowing what I was going to be doing, of being able to explain to anybody, as I let go of the need to do it, what was emerging started to happen. And it was almost magical. I mean, it involved, in many cases, the right people showing up, conversations happening, being invited to help write the report to the UN with the Center for Bhutan Studies and G&H Research with a great international working group in Bhutan, the G&H Center starting as an NGO, a colleague, To Ha-ven, who was also with us in our masterclass group, starting out at the G&H Center. All these things that you couldn't have logically planned start to happen. And I believe that happens all the time. I think we're constantly being invited into the future, but it requires a kind of leap of faith and a letting go of the things that have previously identified you to yourself. It's kind of like looking at a mirror, and where you used to be able to see your reflection very clearly, there's somebody there that you don't yet see or recognize, and being able to move towards that reflection. So I think that's the feeling that I had. And I'd like to invite all of us maybe to think about this experience of the bardo of not knowing that we are all in now collectively and individually. And one of the previous identities I had was a musician. I used to play in a band in South Africa, and these days I like to take out my violin just to improvise. To me, this is my practice of being generative and taking risks. So I don't know what I'm going to play yet. I'm just going to try to create a sense of moving into uncertainty. And as I do that, I would like to invite folks to journal, or else just put into the chat box what are the feelings that come up for you as you sink into this not knowing stage, the bardo, the gap, and the letting go. I'm just smiling as I'm reading some of the words on the chat. I'm getting comfortable with the not knowing, a beautiful holding of stillness and exhilaration, floating in a fresh wind. It was like a caterpillar coming out to be a butterfly. I felt the valley and the mountains speaking to me. Peace and in the present. Celebrate the not knowing. So I think, to me, when I think about what is it about creating a mindful economy as well as a well-being economy, it's a little bit what we're talking about right here, which is the ability to be present with the not knowing. I think one of the questions I've been holding is, as this economic system is cracking and falling apart, what's emerging is not going to happen on Monday. It's like what Peter was saying, we're talking about a decade of change, but definitely the seeds of what is going to be new are here already. And in that space of not knowing, they can start to manifest. But we have to have the capacity to sit and stay and be with the not knowing, and not just try to go back to what we've known before. Because that's a stepping backwards. It's crawling back into that snake skin that no longer fits us. So I think that's, to me, why this a personal practice of awareness, which I know is something we've been talking about, is really important for the collective awareness and for the collective evolution that I think you and Peter were talking about earlier today. So I hope that gave a taste of the feeling of the bardo, and also the capacity to rest without not knowing. I wish we could meet some of these people who are online right now. I think it feels like very much like a global connection right at this moment.
It does, Julia. I wonder, so we could stay in this room. Our plan was actually to allow for a little small group conversation around what's coming up. And I wonder whether you want to lead us into that, and what else you may want to give us on our way as we maybe in the next few minutes move into a 8 or 10 minute sequence of small group breakouts, and then continue the conversation in the plenary.
Thank you, Otto. I think for the reflection period and going into the smaller groups, I would love to hear, I would ask people to first take a moment to just collect their thoughts about what was passing through them as we had this moment of sinking into the not knowing, the bardo period. And to maybe if it feels comfortable in your group, to be honest about the difficult feelings that come up, the darker feelings. Because there's usually a feeling, I know, in my gut. I mean, you can feel it in various parts of your body, but for me, it's always a kind of gut feeling that's similar to when suddenly the floor falls out from under you, that feeling of wanting to hold on to something. So to maybe first spend some time just talking about the feeling that comes up when we're in that period of not knowing, and just to be honest about it. Where do you feel it in your body? How have you noticed it? What situations have brought it up for you? And then maybe to take the conversation into a second part, which is, how do you move through that feeling? And how do you hold that feeling and move through with it? And it's not about denying it. It's not about pretending it's not there. But at the same time, there is a movement. And some of us are able to call on different skills, experiences to be able to do that. So I'd love for people in the group to also share how have they done that? What has helped them to move, make a movement through that feeling of the ground dropping out from under you, or whatever it is that comes up in that space of not knowing. So I'd love to invite us to talk about that and to share that in our small groups.
Beautiful. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you had a wonderful time connecting in your breakouts. And as you stay connected, if you haven't found a social solidarity circle, you might just reach out to the people you were just talking with in a private chat and share information. And you can also continue on the GAIAjourney.org feature for that. So before we move on, we'd really love to hear what came up for you in that experience that you just went into. So you can start by sharing it in the chat. And you can also, we'll share audio and visual. We'd love to hear your voices as well. So if you'd like to do that, you can click on the participants button if you're with us on Zoom. And when you click on the participants button, there will be a little blue hand, and you can raise your hand and we will, your virtual hand, and we will bring your voice and video across all of our Zoom channels and out to YouTube. First up is Greg Sherwin.
Hello, everyone. I'm at the moment, I'm very excited about not knowing. And because I'm realizing that the space of not knowing is such a glorious space of opportunity and peace and surrender and trust and openness to what wants to be known. So I was with a group of lovely ladies who all seem to know that place inside of themselves and shared that. So I was really graced by their presence in the space of not knowing. So the intention is to surrender into not knowing when knowing has become too important to me, and to explore what's possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Beautiful. We'll move to Ambika in channel 1.
Hi, so I just wanted to address the idea of being in the middle places. And it's not just one middle place, there are many middle places with not only what's happening out in the world, but in my own life where I'm working towards moving, retiring in a year and so on. And suddenly I'm not sure where I'm going. And what was really beautiful about listening all day today and also to Julia's what to do with the darker feelings. And what I realized was that parsing the unknown also offers me a lot of richness, where the shadows are so important and grounding in a way, while at the same time I'm feeling this impatience to restructure, and I don't know what that's going to look like or where it's going to be, because some of the things that I enjoy doing, the writing and the art, will still go with me. But I don't know what form it's going to take, and where I'm going to land, where I'm going to live. So it's all of this happening, but so while there is a sense of lostness and isolation, sometimes there's this sense of, these are things I've been thinking for 20, 30 years, and now these things are opening. So I'm really grateful to be in this space, and with your wonderful facilitation as well, Antoinette. It's been beautiful. Thank you. And I'd like to actually find a hub. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Ambika. It's a powerful place to be in. And as you look for the hub, because you just mentioned that towards the end there, we'll talk a little bit about it later, but I just do want to say that you can create a hub and you can also join a hub. So if there's something that's coming up for you, maybe somebody else in our session has heard the call and is creating the hub right now for the one that you need. So so that option is available, and we will be kind of seeding and populating the hubs in this next week. So we will move to hear from Nick next.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. What happened to me was this tension that came from my belly and my solar plexus and my heart, and was constrained in my throat. And it felt related to this intense pressure from outside, which I also helped create, to do something. And it felt like there was a lot of fear that if I don't do something, other vested interests will seize control of this inflection point. And so there's a lot of fear in just holding that tension of the not knowing. And how a way to work with that was around, what if I include my biggest fears, you know, of ecological destruction, of the species extinction, and rather than allow myself be defined in my resistance to that, to actually hold that possibility and ask myself, who would I be from there? And then one of the other beautiful women that was in the group shared around this wind of change that's blowing, and how there's a fundamental trust in the intelligence of the universe. And I guess that's the ground that allows the holding of those, of that possibility of the worst and the best. And what I realize is who I am and who I would aspire to be is no different, whether the worst was to happen or the best was to happen. And that was a really liberating feeling, and terrifying too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for those practices, and to everyone for sharing. I know that there's so much more, and we could probably continue on, but we want to make sure that we can honor the time that we have together, and actually turn our attention to Kelvy and her wall, which she has been building all day. So Kelvy, or actually even longer, but Kelvy, we'd love to hear some of your insight, and then take a look at the wall in a deeper place.
Yeah, so I've been trying to integrate over the sessions over time. So this is, I think, the 4th session that I've been working, taking away and adding in. And this, the two concepts that I really got from Julia around the bardo, like the gap of space into the unknown, and then this invitation into the future that requires a leap of faith, those two things combined really sum up this entire journey for me, and what I'm trying to do here, and what I think we're on together, which is accessing our curiosity, compassion, and courage, like Otto spoke of earlier and other times, and being willing to be bold and mess up and have things maybe not look as beautiful as you might want them to look, but moving in the direction that the future is inviting us to go into. So that's the spirit that I have taken away from this session and the day, and will turn it back to Antoinette to lead us into some sort of another bardo experience, perhaps. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kelvy. And we'll stay with this image, and if you can make your screen a full screen, that will definitely help, just to be able to dive really into what we're seeing here. And we'll do that by just staying together in stillness for a few moments together, and just noticing what you're seeing, sensing, and feeling. So at first, let's just pause together here.
Same.
Notice what is coming up for you. Perhaps begin to put in the chat using the prompts I see, I sense, or I feel, to share just that, what you see, sense, and feel. So I see, I sense.
Now going back
Go ahead.
to the same, which I wanted to change anyway.
I see, I sense, I feel. I sense the song within the bardo, a delicate tune I can hardly hear, but is there within the darkness guiding me.
I feel encouraged by the permission to be imperfect.
I see the creature forming. I see a big snake trying to shed its skin. I sense beyond letting go, letting come. There is letting arrive.
I see that something new is breaking through the unknown, light that will take place. I feel the power is in the dark. I sense a new organ of perception awakening, a new space opening up between us, the collective awareness of humanity.
And also, just from YouTube, I see a newborn turtle trying to swim. I see Gaia trying to recover life and health. So thank you, everyone, for sharing all of your feelings, senses, and what you're seeing. Thank you so much, Kelvy, for sharing this image with us and letting us dive in even deeper into this Bardo space as we move towards crystallizing. And I'll turn it over to Otto and Julia and see if there are closing words that you have to share with us.
Maybe to tee it up for you, Julia, what one sentence that I caught from the chat was happy turtle stepping into the unknown. And I was struck by the sharing. So a lot of us really connected with, Julia, what you shared with us on the edge between the known, stepping from the known to the unknown, from what we know into the unknown. And that really leaning into the not knowing and be, and that's really essentially what the open mind is about. And then you also, and that was the second meta theme that really ran throughout the day, but really culminated in your session here, is on the level of the opening of the heart. And what is the equivalent there? It's moving from feelings that we feel comfortable within to leaning into our own discomfort, right? The darker side of our feelings. And that's kind of what you open up for us as a space. And without the opening of the heart, nothing useful is going to happen. We know that. And so I just wanted to name and acknowledge that what you have been doing for us with the practice. And then the third kind of meta theme that ran throughout the day and showed up in all the sessions has to do with the third phenomenon, right? Which is the opening of the will. And what is that? So what does that look like and feel like, the opening of the will? It basically has to do with moving from a planned future that we thought we know into an emerging future that we have no idea what it will look like. And the only way to do it, so the eye of the needle to move from one space to the other of those two, is letting go. It's the letting go and letting come. So that was the third theme that ran throughout the day, particularly with Humberto Maturana, the Spanish session. So that was, really center stage. But it also showed up in our conversation. So I really want to express my gratitude on behalf of the GAIA group that you are part of, right? So to leading us into the deepening of that space. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Otto. It's been such a pleasure for me also. I loved what Kelby also said about being willing to be bold and to be messy and to make mistakes, because that's also, for me, one of the practices of moving out of the unknown, is to let go of my need for it to be right, for it to be something that's pretty or works. It's just, sometimes it's just a step. It's just that turtle making that first step. And I wanted to say how much I really appreciate people going into the session and really being vulnerable. For me, the connection between G&H, which can sometimes feel a bit academic and lofty and something up here that's being done by a country, it needs to land and become personal. And I saw some chat questions asking, how can we learn more about this? Where can we find out more? I just wanted to mention Canada, where I'm in kind of my social isolation lockdown mode now, is opening up interest in G&H, and there we'll be doing a program here between Canada and Bhutan that launches online called the Right Livelihood in G&H program at Windhorse Farm in Canada, and the Bardo will be a big part of it. We said we're starting online in November because where everybody is in this space of not knowing. Let's create a space in the forest to try to make sense of it, and let's make right livelihood be about G&H at the personal level, not trying to fix the world out there, but what does it look like for us, each of us as individuals, as we step into the unknown? So it'll be a gathering of fellow turtles who want to take that first step forward. Such a pleasure to be with all of you today, and wonderful to see you also, Antoinette. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Julia. It has been so refreshing to have you sharing with us, and to hear about what you're doing, and just inviting us into that space. Definitely moved me to tears and to joy, and I don't think I'm alone in that. So thank you for that, and thank you, Otto, for your guidance and beautiful questions. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this journey, for joining us at this time. We will provide additional resources in our follow-up over the weekend. We will be launching macro hubs next week. We will be looking out for your topic interests as you put them in by joining and creating hubs. And we hope that you continue the conversation in social solidarity circles. And really just thank you for staying with, and as we move with together in the next phase of our journey. So you can find us again on GaiaJourney.org. You can stay in touch with the email list. You can contribute and follow on in hashtag GAIA Journey. So anywhere on social media, if you click onto that, we can connect with each other there. So thank you again, everybody. And as we move towards this, the invitation is to stay in that Bardo place and to move into the collective, moving into some of these ways of going from ego to eco and sensing into what that can mean for you. So enjoy the next couple of weeks of crystallizing, and we will see you in our next inhale and maybe in some exhale community conversations. So we can all unmute and say goodbye. Thank you.
Saying that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Saying that.
Bye, everyone.
Hey,
So much.
hey,
So great.
ciao, falou.